This program is presented by University of California Television. Like what you learn? Help others discover UCTV podcasts by leaving a comment or rating for us in iTunes.
There is not a single lawyer in this country who has had a more profound impact on campaign finance law than has James Bopp. Mr. Bopp was the lawyer behind the Citizens United case, which ultimately led to the Supreme Court decision that made it possible for corporations and unions to independently spend unlimited amounts of money to support the political candidates of their choice. Mr. Bopp also figured prominently in Bush v. Gore, which in no small way determined the outcome of a presidential election 13 years ago. He also argued and won a case before the U.S. Supreme Court called Republican Party of Minnesota versus White, which in many states changed the way judicial elections are conducted. And all of that doesn't even begin to describe the work he has done for the last 35 years as general counsel of the National Right to Life, nor does it describe all the work he's done for the Republican Party and his current job as special counsel to the Republican National Committee. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that among conservatives, he is widely viewed as a living legend at this point. I also think it's probably fair to say that at the other end of the political spectrum, the left-wing liberal end of that spectrum, he is often portrayed as the Prince of Darkness. James Bopp, welcome to Legally Speaking.
Thank you. Wow, what an introduction.
I was being slightly facetious about the Prince of Darkness part, but it is true, is it not, that the kind of work that you do and what you've managed to accomplish over the course of your rather extraordinary career does generate a lot of strong feelings, correct?
True enough. I've been involved in a number of controversial issues on a national level, and some of the cases I've won have, as you described, had a profound effect. And for better or worse, I am credited with that, but honestly, it's the judges that write the opinions, not the lawyers, so they deserve the credit, not me.
Back in January of 2010, you told the New York Times that you had a 10-year plan to, quote, and I'll just read the quote here, dismantle the entire regulatory regime that is called campaign finance law. Now, my understanding is that after the quote appeared, you acknowledged that there was no 10-year plan. But let's say there was or is a 10-year plan, and this is a trick question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Say there was such a plan. Wouldn't you now be ahead of schedule?
I think we're on schedule, actually. But I said that to the New York Times kind of in jest, and because if I was referring to anything, I was referring to what was in my mind or is in my mind, because I think about cases and how they fit in the Supreme Court's agenda, and how one builds upon another. And some cases, such as Citizens United, was expressly and specifically built on the victory we had in Wisconsin Right to Life. Mm-hmm. So, and now we have a case I'll be arguing on contribution limits in October in the Supreme Court, and aspects of it are built upon the case I won Randall versus Sorrell, which struck down Vermont's low contribution limit. So,
Yeah.
so I do think about
So you
how
don't
these
have a
things develop.
10-year plan, but you're on schedule with the plan that you don't have.
That
so
I don't have.
Does that mean, in fact, you do have a plan?
Well, you could say.
This is almost existential.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I didn't really have a 10-year plan that specific, but what I was saying is I thought that it was certainly plausible that within 10 years from that, from the decision the first decision in Wisconsin Right to Life, which was in 2005. We won the thing on the merits in 2007, but that it's perfectly plausible that from that merits decision that it would we could see the Supreme Court dismantle all the justifications for campaign finance reform in 10 years, and we are on track to do that.
You know, when I read your comments over the years, it occurs to me that you are to campaign finance what Wayne LaPierre of the NRA is to guns. And what I mean by that is, just as Wayne LaPierre argues that the more guns that we have in our society and the fewer restrictions there are on those guns, the safer we all are. You are arguing, are you not, that the more money there is sloshing around our political system and the fewer regulations there are on that money, the healthier our democracy? Is that a fair analogy?
Well, I don't know what you mean by sloshing around.
Sloshing is slightly pejorative.
Yeah, it is.
Moving, it's circulating around.
No, I don't think
what's the proper verb?
I don't think we ought to use it as bribes for candidates.
I never use the word
slosh. Well, but sloshing around.
Circulating.
Circulating.
What verb would you use?
Using for campaign speech. That's what I would use.
Okay.
Because
but
every
every
dime that we are seeking to protect, whether it's a contribution to a candidate or a political party or a PAC, or it's independent speech by all those entities, or it's protection of issue advocacy by any group,
right.
All of those things are speech. So that's what the First Amendment protects.
And the more of it we have, the better.
Speech.
The more of it we have, the better.
Yes.
There's no logic, no limitation to that logic.
Well, there's a practical limitation. It is true that at a certain point of saturation, you're
wasting your money.
Yeah, exactly. Your marginal returns are starting to really decrease.
Right.
So no one budgets an unlimited amount of money, even if they have an unlimited amount of money, to convey a message, because at a certain point they're wasting their money.
Yeah.
I know the reformers always like to speak about unlimited, but that practically that's ridiculous. No one would do that.
You're a native of Terre Haute, Indiana, and that's at least one thing, perhaps the only thing, that you share in common with Eugene Debs. This is that early 20th century politician who ran for president several times as a socialist. I believe one of those times he ran was from his prison cell. Flashing forward to our own time, do you really believe that Barack Obama is a socialist?
Yes, I certainly do. I think his ideology is socialistic. I mean, every element that we identify with a socialist movement, he adheres to. He wants to do redistribution of wealth. He's very much in favor of the government taking over about everything that is important, certainly. He doesn't believe 100% in government solutions to things. So a lot of the essential elements of a socialistic type view, but I mean, there's a lot of variations within that, that broad category. But he adheres to. So yes.
So by that definition, let's say with the exception of Ronald Reagan, have all our post-World War II presidents been socialists?
No, not at all.
Franklin Roosevelt, certainly, right?
That's questionable, I think.
Really?
Yes, I mean, I agree that he wanted a bigger role for government, but he didn't want an all-encompassing role.
You think you view Barack Obama as a bigger socialist than Franklin Roosevelt?
Definitely.
Even though
Ideologically true.
Even
yes.
though in 2010 he agreed to, actually it was 2011, he agreed to $1.5 trillion cuts to the federal
those were cuts in growth. Those weren't cuts.
Uh-huh.
You don't live in Washington, D.C. You know in Washington, D.C. a cut is a cut in growth. You don't live in Washington, D.C. You don't have to buy into that kind of BS rhetoric.
But that's a significant amount of money, and John Boehner boasted after he agreed to those cuts that, you know, he got a good deal.
They were paltry, cuts in growth. That's not cut in government.
What about Richard Nixon?
No, definitely not. Definitely not.
He proposed a more ambitious health care plan than Barack Obama did. He wanted a guaranteed income for the poor.
I didn't say that.
I
didn't say I agreed with everything Nixon did. In fact, I supported Ronald Reagan in '68 and '72 and '76 and finally in 2000. So I didn't say I supported everything any of these people have done. I'm just talking about their general philosophy of government. And I think it's quite clear that Obama has adhered to what he learned as a young man, you know, at the knee of his Reverend Wright and what some of his mentors at the time, Alinsky, I'm sorry. I mean, the rules for risk.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, you can see him play out the rules for radicals, which was the manual for community organizers at the time that he was a community organizer.
I know that you're an opponent of Obamacare, but do you view health care as a right as opposed to being simply viewed as a privilege?
What does a right mean? What do you mean a right? You mean a legal right?
Yeah,
No.
that if you don't have the means to afford the care you need to have, whether it's to deal with a life-threatening illness or to maintain a certain quality of life, you don't think that people have a
right to it? A legal right? No.
Yeah.
No. I don't think they have a legal right to anything like that. I mean, to food if they're hungry or whatever. But I think there's a very profound obligation on individuals to provide, you know, to provide charity and to ensure that people who are in real need are taken care of, so that if they're hungry, they're fed. Now, I think that's best provided through private charity, but I don't oppose laws that really do target those people. You know, of course, right now we have 42 million on food stamps, and that's ridiculously more than the people that are hungry in the United States. So it's become just a way of transferring wealth. Part of the Obama administration's goal and policy is to transfer wealth from higher-making people to lower-making people, and this is just one way that they're implementing it through a huge expansion of the food stamp program, not because the people are hungry, but because they think they should have more money. Obama thinks they should have more money. That's all.
Well, you know, I'm glad you're talking about food stamps, because I want to, you know, touch upon that as well. But you know, with respect to health care, I mean, it's something of a puzzle to me, and maybe you can help me to understand it. You know, there are any number of states where you have pro-life governors who express a real reverence for life, and I have no reason at all to question that. But then they have turned around and have rejected the federal money that's available to them to expand Medicaid to provide health coverage to their poorest citizens. And I guess I just don't understand that.
Well, you know, a lot of liberals do not understand that anything about private charity and about the responsibilities that people have to provide for private charity, that we each have an obligation to do that, to help our fellow man. They think that the only compassion is through government. And so that's the reason people misunderstand what a governor would do in that situation. It's not that he's opposed to people being provided medical care. He's opposed to a particular program, the effect, number one, who it applies to, and number two, does it really apply to the needy? And number two is, what other effects is it going to have? And of course, as we know, if they buy into that program, they also have to match it with state funds that they can't afford. So,
well, the first 2 years, the federal government's going to pay 100% of the money, and then it gradually goes up to the year 2020.
Well, don't you think a responsible governor ought to think beyond 2 years and how it's going to be impact them?
Well, I think at 2020, each state would have to pay 10%. It still seems like a pretty good deal.
Well, they don't think it is, and you know, at some point we've got what's happening in America now is that government spending is eating up private charity because number one, they're targeting the wealthy, and the wealthy are you know, have money to give, and number two is they're really advocating a view of charity, which is and some leftists, you know, really believe it's illegitimate for there to be private charity. They don't want. Jamie Ripken is an example, a professor at George Washington, who I debated recently, and he made this point. He doesn't want there to be charitable contributions because he wants the government to decide all charity. He's a real leftist, and but that's a point of view that is pretty prevalent on the liberal side of the spectrum, and that's why probably one of the reasons why liberals give so little on as far as private charity is concerned. Conservatives give way more per capita and by percentage of income than do liberals.
But in these conservative states, if you look at the health statistics, mortality rates, those conservative states that are rejecting this Medicaid expansion money are often doing less well than the rest of the country. Doesn't that concern you? Well,
that's not necessarily related to what they spend on Medicaid. Why would you think that?
Well, if they're not getting insurance, and well, so you view that as a total coincidence, like in the Medicare.
Well, it's not coincidental. It is true that the poorer states are more conservative than the richer states. In fact, the richest states are liberal, and they almost give no money in charity. That is the liberals that live there. You know, they almost give no money. They're at the very bottom of the 50-page, 50-state list, where the most conservative states are at the very top as far as per capita giving, while their per capita income is the exact opposite.
So, I mean, when the Los Angeles Times did an analysis and found that, for example, colon cancer deaths are 16% higher in states opposing Medicaid expansion, and deaths from breast cancer are 8% higher, you don't feel my question is, you don't feel that accepting that Medicaid expansion money would improve this situation?
That's a correlation.
Right.
That's not a causation.
Well,
I mean, what is colon cancer caused by?
I'm asking
It's caused by things like smoking.
Well,
and there are higher levels of smoking in those states.
Right.
True. Also.
Right.
As well as having lower general income that affects all sorts of things, such as your diet, which affects colon cancer.
Preventative care, like yearly exams, can make a difference, right? In terms of mortality.
Yeah, possibly. I mean,
but again, my question.
There's no causation here. This is a.
You don't believe
there's a logical fallacy.
You don't believe there's a causation
between expanding Medicare and colon cancer?
We're talking about Medicaid. Okay.
No.
Okay.
I don't.
So you don't
think
believe
there's a causation.
So you don't believe then that governors accepting this money would improve these numbers that I'm citing?
Well, it either wouldn't, or it wouldn't to the extent that it's worth the cost, or they can't afford their contribution. Okay. So it doesn't matter what the government is offering. They can't afford their contribution. Well, then they can't afford their contribution. So they can't afford to accept it.
What do you make of a RAND study that was done on Texas that showed that actually by refusing the money, Texans will end up spending more money because they'll have to deal with the cost of all that uncompensated care?
I don't know anything about a study like that, so how can I respond?
Okay.
how can I don't know its methodology. I don't know how it came to that conclusion, or whether that they even supported that conclusion.
How do you feel about Romneycare?
I think it's different than Obamacare in a couple of critical ways that certainly meant that it ought to be looked at differently.
It has a mandate, right?
It has a mandate.
It affects businesses.
It affects businesses.
In fact, I think Obamacare mandates that businesses provide health insurance for companies.
Apparently not. They just waived it.
Well, they're delaying it, right?
I'm trying to figure out how they do that when the statute says, you're supposed to start today.
Right.
And there's no waivers anywhere in the statute.
But Romney didn't delay it. And in his state, if you have just 11 employees, you have to provide health insurance. So it's actually more liberal than Obamacare in that one regard, right?
Yeah, it's different in that one regard, and it'd be more liberal in that one regard. Mm-hmm. So do you want to come at this from another perspective than liberal, or is this going to be all liberal perspective? Now, how is it different from the way a conservative would look at it?
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I dare you to.
I don't. It's a state program as opposed to a federal program.
Does that have any constitutional dimensions? Do you think?
Undoubtedly so. I mean, but the Supreme Court didn't think so by a 5-4 vote.
Look, the Supreme Court hasn't, gotten all of its cases right, just the ones I've handled.
So, if you were a citizen of Massachusetts, would you have supported Romney's plan? No. Why not?
Because I think it is too much government and too much government directed health care. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to move away from that to a more privatized version. I think the government intervention has been distorting the healthcare system, made it more expensive, made it less responsive, and that we had got to get away from it.
Was it hard for you to make the decision to support Mitt Romney? There were more conservative candidates in the field during the last election cycle. Why Mitt Romney?
Well, I originally supported him 4 years before. So I've supported him in the last two presidential races.
So is it just habit?
I wouldn't think so, would you?
I don't think. But I mean, but there is an interesting question there. Is there not? I mean, you could have gone with Gingrich. You could have gone with Michelle Bachmann. You could have gone with Santorum.
For people that are really interested in this, I wrote an article for National Review explaining exactly why I was supporting Mitt Romney and dealing with Romneycare and other issues
and for that matter, abortion. I mean, he wasn't until 2002 that
he was a pro-life governor.
Well, I think it wasn't
he was a pro-life governor. He didn't do a single thing
in a very unequivocal way.
Well,
came out as a
that was the first
politician.
Issue that he had to deal with as governor.
Yeah.
And he said, "I'm going to be a pro-life governor," and he was.
Okay, but with the benefit of hindsight, do you think one of the other candidates would have been a better candidate?
No.
You don't?
No, I don't think any of the other candidates would have done better than he did. No, I don't.
After Mitt Romney's defeat, the conventional wisdom, I think, and I think one has to italicize the words conventional wisdom.
Yeah, I think that's appropriate.
But the conventional wisdom.
It's usually what the New York Times and Washington Post has to say about
Wall Street Journal too. Wall Street Journal.
Their editorial
Fox
page.
News.
The conventional wisdom could not simultaneously be what the Washington Post and New York Times says and what the Wall Street Journal editorial page.
Okay.
That could not happen because they're on the opposite sides.
There's a blue moon every so often.
I know of one. Immigration right now. But that's all right.
But that conventional wisdom was that to win future elections, the Republican Party has to strike a more moderate tone, at least with respect to some issues. Like, for example, you're already shaking your head, but I'll complete the sentence.
That's the liberal comment.
Like immigration reform. You totally disagree with that analysis.
I disagree with the point of view that the Republican Party has to change its philosophy in order to be successful politically, definitely. And you're going to see the truth of that statement next year.
What about same-sex marriage? As you know, there are now 13 states in this country that have legalized same-sex marriage. The Supreme Court has ruled that the Defense of Marriage Act is unconstitutional. it's hard for me to imagine that social conservatives can, in the long run, win on this issue. But let me ask you a more fundamental question.
What does it have to do with it?
Well, I'm not sure that it has anything to do with it, except winning matters to some people.
Well, marriage is between a man and a woman. That was the way it was designed, and that is the way it works best, and it works best both for the society because it's a compatible unit that obviously is based in biology, and secondly, that it's the best place to raise children, and so it's the best nucleus, if you will, to build a society upon, if you want to have a healthy society and a successful society.
Do you think the recognition of same-sex marriage is a threat to all that?
Yes, it's shown that it undermines the legitimacy, and it undermines even the people's interest in marriage. Yes, I mean, marriage rates are lower, for instance, in countries that have recognized same-sex marriage long enough ago to be meaningful, like Sweden.
Let me ask you this. Dick Cheney, conservative guy. Certainly, he's the sort of.
I don't agree with everything that Dick Cheney ever did. You know that?
Okay. Let me complete.
Can I say that in the future, any politician you name, there will be something I don't agree with him.
Okay. Point well taken.
Okay. So can we talk about something else?
But certainly, well, let me complete the question. He certainly is the sort of conservative that liberals love to hate, but he also happens to have a daughter who is lesbian. And last year, she got married to her longtime partner, and Dick Cheney expressed nothing but affection and acceptance and embraced that relationship. So put yourself in Dick Cheney's shoes for a moment. Let's say you have a daughter who's lesbian, and she is telling you that she wants to marry her longtime partner, and she wants your blessing. What do you say to her?
I can't put myself in that position. That's presumptuous of me. I wouldn't do that. It's absurd. You couldn't imagine that? No, I have 3 daughters, and then they're heterosexual. So no, I can't imagine that. I can't put myself in Dick Cheney's shoes, which is what you asked me to do. Yeah. What I can say is that you can, your children. Make choices you wouldn't make. They also do things that you wouldn't do, and they also do sometimes things that you think are absolutely wrong. That doesn't mean you don't love them. And that doesn't mean also that you accept what they did. Right. Okay? Right. You could still love them, not accept what they did, and that's a perfectly consistent and loving and proper parental position. You don't just, because your child wants to do X, that doesn't mean you change your view on X and say, well, okay, fine. Given what you're saying, I'm wondering if you can imagine, say, a daughter asking you for her blessing, for your blessing in that situation. Do you have any idea what you would say? I would not support them getting married, if that's the question. Meaning, I wouldn't endorse them getting married. I mean, in fact, there are other people or situations in which they might consider getting married that I also wouldn't endorse or support and urge them not to do it. Okay. Now, does that mean I won't love them? Of course, I'll love them, and I'll respect the relationship that they have with whoever it is that they have it with. Okay. After to switch gears just a little bit, after the 2012 election, you gave an interview to the Terre Haute Tribune-Star, and you were quoted as saying that in order for Republicans to win the next election, they needed to get more personal
in their attacks against Democrats. And let me read you the quote. You said, quote, "While we prefer to talk about policy and principles, the Democrats prefer in many instances to mischaracterize people on a personal level, on a character level. The Republican Party has to learn to deal with that. We have to learn to defend ourselves from it. We also have to learn that because so many voters consider personal attributes to be important, we have to talk about personal attributes of Democrats and liberals." So I guess, you know.
There's a lot of voters that care about those things more than
Right.
they do policy.
So here's the thing.
And in a certain level, we should all care about them.
Yeah, I guess the reason why I was drawn to that quote is because over the years, I haven't noticed that Republicans are reticent about launching personal attacks against Democrats, whether it's the Swift boats against Kerry or the birthers talking about Barack Obama. What am I missing?
Well, you're not missing anything that a little liberal would have seen.
Okay.
I mean, this is great. You're a classic.
Good.
You
So
know,
tell me what I'm missing.
You are classic.
Tell me what I'm missing.
This is
You think that Republicans are too reticent about attacking Democrats?
Let me explain it.
Okay.
Because the
Good.
liberals have a fallacy, okay? And the way the normal debate goes is, and you could see this in Romney and Obama. What Romney does is he does ads that says Obama passed Obamacare, and Obamacare is bad. Obama has an an ad that says Mitt Romney's a bad person because he won't talk to his garbage collector, and here's his garbage collector, and he puts him on. He's,
I didn't see that ad. Did they run a garbage collector ad? Did they really run a garbage collector ad?
Yeah, they ran a garbage collector ad.
Really?
Yeah,
I didn't
and
see
he said,
that
"I've been
one."
collecting garbage in front of his mansion for years, and he's never come out and said thank me."
And who put this? Was it a super PAC or was it Obama's campaign?
No, it was the Obama's campaign.
Really? I got to check that out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so now, but liberals.
Yes.
Because,
You point at me.
Yes,
you got me
liberals
pegged.
like you.
Yes.
Liberals like you view an attack on your policy positions as a personal attack.
Well,
so you would view somebody attacking Obamacare as and associating with you as being a personal attack upon you.
I wouldn't.
And yes, well, you may not because you have this one difference among all liberals.
Okay, so you agree with me on one thing.
Read Thomas Sowell's book on the vision of the anointed, and it explains how liberals view the world. Liberals view the world as them having good motives and wanting to and being judged on their motives.
Right.
All right. So a debate over welfare would go like this. The liberal would say, we need more welfare because, you know, we want to help these people. The conservative would say, well, yeah, but the programs, welfare programs you have are not helping them. They're making them more dependent and less this and less that. And the liberal would interpret that as an attack on their motives because they were trying to help them. And they would say, you're attacking me personally. You must be, and then of course they also then think that, well, their motives, the conservatives' motive must be evil, or they would support the same policy that the good-hearted liberal wants to support.
The birther thing had nothing to do with it.
So that's why liberals view policy debates as personal attacks. Conservatives don't. Liberals do. And so every ad any conservative has ever done has always been a personal attack, even though the vast majority of them are policy attacks.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
I think there's an element of truth to what you're saying because folks are sensitive. But the birther thing, there was no policy involved in that, a policy issue involved in that, was there?
Well, I think there was a constitutional provision. I know you're trying to make me defend every crazy conservative idea.
So you acknowledge it's crazy?
Huh?
You acknowledge that birther thing was crazy?
Because there's no evidence for it. It's crazy.
Right.
Okay, to be pursuing when there's no evidence.
Conservatives tend to portray government programs as cultivating dependency, correct?
I think that's a description of their effect.
But that's not the only thing they do. Don't they, on occasion, enable people to reach their potential? Like, for example, the GI Bill after World War II. It's not just about dependency. It's about enabling people to reach their potential.
Well, but the point is what's the predominant effect? And the predominant effect, particularly the bigger the program gets, and the more people it encompasses.
GI Bill is a huge program, right?
Yeah, but I think there's differences with the GI Bill than the normal welfare program. That wasn't picked out because of need. That was picked out because of service to the country in the Army, in the Air Force, etc. So that was a completely different category of people. They weren't being picked out by need.
How do you feel about Medicare?
I think it'd be a lot better privatized, and it'd be a lot, I think it's distorted the medical system.
Will a Republican candidate for president ever say that going forward, do you think?
I hope. Well, either that or we'll never recover.
So in that sense, I mean,
we may never recover.
You're a man of principle, and yet you are involved in the political process. You're very active. You've got to swallow a lot to do what you do, don't you?
Yeah, but I'm not unidimensional, if you haven't noticed.
But I mean, you know that there's a game to be played.
I don't consider it a game, but I consider it to be a different arena than my church or theology or just philosophy. It's practical.
And you got to be practical.
Yes, you have to be, because you're in a practical world. And you can never get everything you want, and nothing is ever perfect.
Let's go back to campaign finance. So much of the work that you've done over the years is to distinguish between what's called issue advocacy versus political advocacy. And that fight gets broken down into what is a sham issue ad, what is a real issue ad, what is express advocacy, what is the functional equivalent of express advocacy, what is electioneering communication. It all got very murky, but these were important fights for you to have, because depending how they turned out determined to what extent, if at all, the ad in question was subject to government regulation. Right,
or being prohibited outright.
Yeah, so did Citizens United get us past all of that?
An awful lot of what you just said. Yes. I mean, what is a functional equivalent is now moot, because that was a cutting back of the electioneering communication definition, and of course that definition has been struck down now. And so the blackout period that the Congress had adopted, where you go to federal prison if you mention the name of a candidate in a broadcast ad in the proximity of an election, was struck down by the Supreme Court. So also the distinction between express advocacy, actually advocating the election of a candidate, or just talking about issues. Many of the reasons why that distinction was important are no longer true now, because again, the court said not only can a corporation do issue ads, they can do express advocacy too.
Right.
So if you can do both, the problem before was you could do one but not the other. Well, now you can do both. And so the distinction, no longer has the force that it had.
Back in 2011, I remember that Mitt Romney got into a heated discussion with a heckler. I guess that's the best way, the most accurate way to describe this gentleman. And at a certain point, Mitt Romney said to this gentleman, "Corporations are people too." That was the quote. And I don't think Citizens United explicitly said anything about corporate personhood.
No, in fact, they said it's completely irrelevant because it was the First Amendment, not the 14th.
Right. But the law as it stands now, as you view it, do corporations have the same right to express themselves under the First Amendment as, say, poets, law professors, talk show hosts?
Definitely. because all of their speech is protected. It's not who it comes from.
There are those who argue against corporate personhood, and they say, well, corporations can't love, they can't cry, they can't get married. I personally think that's a weak argument because there are people in my own family who fit that description. But here's a notion I am impressed by, and that's shareholder rights. And to that point, let me ask you, if say you're a shareholder in a corporation and the CEO draws from the general treasury to support a candidate who's pro-abortion, pro-Obamacare, pro-socialism, at the very least, as a shareholder, don't you have the right to know from the CEO where that money is going?
No, I don't have a right to.
Really?
No.
You don't feel you do?
No. I mean, I would be interested because I'd want to sell my stock, or if I figured that this violated, their fiduciary responsibility to the corporation, where they're wasting corporate assets and not using them for the business purposes or to advance the business purposes of the corporation. Well, then they could be sued, and of course I'm in the business of suing people. So yeah, that would be interesting. Those would both be interesting on those grounds, but I don't have a right. What's my right? What's the basis of my right?
Well, when Justice Kennedy wrote his...
I just own a piece of stock, and I can just sell it.
But I mean, you're an investor in that company, and so you don't feel, as an investor, you have that at the very least the CEO should have an obligation, let's put it that way, to tell you where this money is going?
No, because they could be doing it for perfectly legitimate business purposes.
Well, they could be, or they may not be.
But that's true of everything that they do.
But you don't feel
whether they pay for going to a conference.
Yeah.
Are they doing it to play golf, or are they doing it because they're going to go to the sessions? I mean, everything they do can be second-guessed, and we have a rule that they are governed by. They have a fiduciary responsibility as directors and officers, and they have to do things that are for the business purposes of that corporation, not eleemosynary, not other. And if they do that, they risk paying it back out of their own pocket.
So there's a petition, as I'm sure you know, before the SEC now, filed by a group of law professors to obligate corporations, publicly traded corporations, to disclose to their shareholders where their political spending is going.
Yeah.
You object, you're against that.
Yeah, I'm against that. I don't think you should burden the political speech of corporations by imposing that requirement. It's interesting that they're not asking labor unions to do the same thing, which shows the partisan agenda that we've been discussing really now since the very beginning.
Yeah.
Since you acknowledged at the beginning that it's also labor unions that benefited from Citizens United. The liberals and the Democrats are only complaining about corporations because it's a partisan agenda.
You go back to Justice Kennedy's opinion. One of the reasons clearly why he was comfortable with the idea of letting corporations spend what they wanted on elections was his faith in what he called the procedures of corporate democracy. But how can you have any faith in those procedures if some or most or much of this money that's being spent is being spent without the knowledge of the shareholders?
They don't notify me when they go to a conference, and it could be to play golf rather than go to the seminars. They don't notify me when they give money to the Brennan Center, the campaign finance people. They don't notify me when they give money to these outfits right here, to Hastings Center, the Hastings Law School, and the California Lawyer. They don't notify me of any of that. Well, any of it could be not for a business purpose. Any of it is possible. And so once you acknowledge that political spending can fit within the business purpose of a corporation, well then it's just another thing that they could spend money on under that rule. And if they violate that rule, they're going to be reaching in their back pocket to reimburse the corporation.
Are you an absolute? When it comes to the First Amendment, would you describe yourself as an absolutist?
No, I would describe the First Amendment as written in absolute terms. Congress shall, think about this for a second. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. Now, if they really wanted Congress to make no law, how would they have written it? what would they have said? If not that, tell me what they would have said. Yeah. We really, really mean that Congress shall make no law, or Congress shall really, really, really not make any law. I mean, they wrote it in absolute terms. Well, now, because we have a doctrine that recognizes that there are compelling governmental interests, so there's like really rare and extreme situations where, like, falsely yelling fire in a crowded theater. Okay, if you did that, you would say, well, that speech, no law means I can say that, and the courts would throw you in jail, and because you committed crimes, and there's a compelling governmental interest to do that.
Right.
So these are really extreme situations that the courts have recognized that life is very complicated and all that, and in rare instances, some of these provisions that seem categorical or absolute give way. But
because life is complicated.
But we've gone so far from extreme situations like publishing in the New York Times the travel schedule of the convoy during World War II. That would be another example where they whacked some newspapers and they defended on the First Amendment, and they said, well, those are compelling governmental interests. We're so far from there to where we are now. It's, I mean,
so when people express the concern just generally that my elected officials are overly influenced by money, is that, in your mind, a legitimate concern?
I don't even know what that means.
It's like,
number one, money, other than contributions, which they're not talking about.
Yeah.
Because we have contribution limits.
Well, it's a kind of crazy situation. I mean, what the system says now is that if I say contribute directly, what's the limit on direct contributions? $2,500 bucks?
$2,600 in the federal system.
So if I contribute $3,000 directly to a candidate.
2,600.
Well, I'm saying 3,000. I'm giving you. I'm putting some leeway.
I'm sorry.
3,000. I'm adding a few more hundred to it.
Sorry about that.
There's a serious danger there of quid pro quo corruption, right?
Yeah.
But
that's absurd.
If I give $1 billion to a super PAC supporting that candidate, no problem. It seems to me that doesn't pass the straight-face test on both counts. You disagree?
No, I agree with half of what you said.
$1 billion, you don't have any problem. You don't have to worry about that $1 billion.
I agree that you cannot even buy a Democrat congressman for $3,000.
We've spent so much time here focusing on, the regulation of money in an election. And an alternative to that, it seems to me, is focusing instead on what these elected folks do once they're in office. Maybe it means that judges should recuse themselves more often. Maybe it means in Congress slowing down the revolving door, where we see so many.
You think there's too much information out there? Is that your problem?
Well, no, I'm not. I'm asking. We're not talking about information now. We're talking about behavior and whether or not some of these proposals that have been suggested to limit the behavior of, well, for example, it has been proposed, Jack Abramoff, now he's a born-again reformer, he's proposing all these things.
Yeah,
but he's saying that, we should have a law that says that lawmakers shouldn't take money from the industries they regulate. Bad idea?
They wouldn't be raising much money now, would they?
Well,
with Obamacare, every individual in the United States is being regulated.
Well,
as far as their health care is concerned, so then you couldn't take contributions from any person, any individual.
I guess what I'm asking, you go back to
they're all subject to taxes.
Yeah.
I mean, who would be left?
You're saying that it would be impossible to have such a law, that it would just make things much, much harder and unreasonably so to
Well, the
raise
people that
money.
have tried it, and there's a few that have tried this, they usually paint with such a broad brush, it doesn't make any sense. And that's what I'm suggesting. you know, I mean, this is a potentially more fruitful area to discuss, okay? Because but there are still constitutional considerations, and one of them is that the form of government that we have contemplates that public officials will be influenced. We contemplate that. That is considered to be a good thing about our system. Is it the public, people that are active in the public, people that will talk about what they are doing in office and be concerned about it or happy about it, whatever the case may be,
Yeah.
that all of that will influence.
You would hope that they would be influenced on the merits.
No,
as opposed to the money.
No, it'll influence people to do the public will.
I mean, to use an analogy, let's say you have an illness and you're going to a doctor and there are several treatment options for this illness. And but you certainly would not want your doctor to automatically go to the treatment option that is manufactured by a company that sends him to Tahiti every year, right?
Do you think that doctors are similarly situated to public officials, elected public officials, or should be?
The question is the people that we put our trust in.
See,
we don't want them to be overly influenced by money.
Can I apologize for calling you a liberal? You're a progressive. Okay? Your concept of democracy is these people are experts, they're like doctors, that we're going to empower them to make decisions, not let anybody influence them. In other words, put them in a ivory tower someplace. They'll be our platonic guardians. Maybe you'll let us vote on them from time to time, but we certainly shouldn't do anything to influence them because after all, they're the elites. They know better than us. They're in the government. They'll decide for us. See, I don't share that conception. I share the Jacksonian conception of popular sovereignty. Is that it's the consent of the people, all right, and that it is a good thing that public officials are influenced by popular will.
Yeah.
Now, as imperfectly as that can be expressed, and true, there are imperfect ways of expressing it, which means if I don't like the way somebody's getting influenced, I got to get in there and try to fix that, not pass a law to prohibit them, and wipe out your and my influence and all the people's influence, which is where the reformers are going. We just wipe out everybody's influence and just leave it to the New York Times. Are we going to let them write editorials? Yes, we are, or no, we're not. Because there are some people that seem to vote only in accordance with what the New York Times says.
Who are those people?
They're liberals, for sure.
They're not people that I would associate with.
Yeah, I'm afraid they are.
How about in response to your accusation or compliment that I'm a liberal? Let me raise the name of John Stennis, Republican.
No, Democrat.
Is he a Democrat? Oh, that's right. He was a Southern Democrat. He was chairman of the Armed Services Committee.
He was.
Back in 1982, they wanted to do.
I'd be shocked you called him Republican.
Yeah, well, see, I get confused with these Southerners, But in 1982, they asked him to do a fundraiser for all these defense contractors. And he said in response, I can't do it ethically, because as the chairman of this committee, I have the power of life and death over these companies, so I'm not going to put myself in that position to appear at a fundraiser in front of all these defense contractors. Wouldn't we all be better off if that sense of propriety returned in Congress? Because I don't...
No, I think what he was saying was, and I respect him for this, that he's personally weak. He's just talking about himself. I will be influenced, and I don't want to be influenced.
So it's an admission of weakness in your...
People refuse contributions from certain people.
Yeah.
I mean, people do this.
Yeah.
Judges, some recuse, for fairly modest reasons, and others hang tough, And if they think that they are going to be influenced inappropriately, well, then they shouldn't do it, whatever it is. That doesn't mean we have to apply the same weak standard or assume weak character. Look, I could without a blink of an eye, go into that fundraiser if I was raising money for myself. Without a blink of an eye. They wouldn't influence me one iota because I'm motivated by philosophy.
Yeah, let me just ask you one more question. And you know, there's a book that I meant to read for this interview that I never got around to reading. It's called The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. I never got around to reading it, but let's assume that this guy who wrote this book was able to offer documentary proof that there are at least a half a dozen liberals in this country who are really good people, really, really good people.
I think there's a lot of liberals that are good people. Why are you
well, I'm just saying, since I haven't read the book, I don't want to overstate what he found.
Oh, okay.
But, you know, so let's take that as a given. What do you think, then, is the most important difference between you as a good person and the liberals, whether there are half a dozen or a dozen of them? What do you think is the most important distinction between you and them?
I've never thought about that for 1 second because that's not pertinent to my thinking. I know it's pertinent to liberal thinking. Who's a good person? Liberals are good people. They're, you know, so you should agree with them. That's not pertinent to me. What's pertinent to me...
Conservatives don't think about what it...
You asked me what I think about.
Yeah.
I told you. I don't think about whether I'm a good person or somebody else is a good person. I think about, when we're talking about politics, I mean, when I was thinking of a wife, I thought about that.
Yeah.
But in the political and legal sphere, I don't think about that for 1 second. It's all about the issues, the policies. Are they good for the country? Are they good for the people that are the alleged beneficiaries?
When you're thinking about yourself, I mean, don't you think, I mean, the question, am I a good person? Am I doing the right thing?
No, I don't think if I'm a good person. I think is what I am advocating consistent with the principles and values that I hold dear and cherish. And that's what I think about. I don't think, am I a good person? What does that have to do with it? That would have to do with my personal conduct.
Yeah.
I mean, I endeavor not to attack people personally. Like, say, you know, briefs are now full of one lawyer saying that the other lawyer misrepresented a case. See, that's a personal attack. That is, you know, you knew the case said X, you said it said Y, you misrepresented it. When you should have said, and what really happened, no doubt, in most cases, is misstated. You know, so that's the difference between, you know, talking about policy or law or whatever, and personal.
Yeah. Well, you strike me as a principled person, and I dare say you strike me as a good person, even though I don't agree with you on 100% of the things that you said, which will make some news. But thank you so much for being here.
Well,
really
that's kind of you, and thank you for inviting me.